Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Beyond the Bot. I'm Tony.
And I'm Steven.
And we're here in the Blue Sky Lab where we love bringing you insights on AI and automation every week and what it means for your business. Today, we're going to be talking about some of the top myths around automation and providing a little bit of additional context and debunking some common misconceptions. So, Steven, let's jump right into it. One of the most common myths that we encounter is that, why fix what ain't broke, right? Our manual process is working fine. We don't need automation. We've already figured it out. What do you say to folks when they come to you with that?
Well, I think things that have worked for a long time, that's helpful and useful. But right now, when our changing economy and things and people trying to get the most out of every single product, out of every single moment and every single minute of time, is if we can save a few minutes here, a few seconds there, that it ultimately helps with the margins. And so it helps from a business perspective. And then also it just helps with the human experience, because there's a lot of jobs that are being done that are not fun to do. They're like, they hurt your thumb every time you do these things. And so if there's a robot that can do that and we can move that person to do something else, then that's just a more better work environment. And so there's a lot of value to that.
And one of the things that strikes me when we kind of put out successful deployments for folks is that that manual process might have been hiding inefficiencies that they didn't even know were there because they didn't know what was possible even.
Yeah. A lot of times we see, well, why do you do it this way? Because we've always done it that way. Well, that doesn't mean it's the most efficient or the best way to do that. And so we work with clients and people to make sure that their companies are doing it the most efficient way. And sometimes maybe it's just changing a small movement that a human does. And sometimes it might be moving a robot here to do that particular task. And we look at the whole problem and say, how do we solve this in the most efficient way possible?
And you're always going to have superstar, rock star employees that are doing things, at an extremely high level, but that's dependent on that one person, right? And so it's difficult to scale because you can't clone that top performing employee necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we're seeing is that in a lot of companies, they're struggling with keeping labor and training labor, keeping them coming in. So we have a labor shortage across a lot of different industries. And so automation can give you the consistency that you need in your line or in your roles and jobs that you have, because you're not dependent on that particular person coming in that day and the line continue to move.
So if you have a manual process that's working great, awesome. It'll be really straightforward to automate because you've already done all the hard problem solving.
Exactly. And that's things that robots are really good at.
So speaking of, kind of the question of labor, Stephen, another common myth that we hear all the time is that automation is going to come and steal everybody's job and that robots are coming to kind of replace you at work. What do you say to folks that kind of have that perspective?
Yeah. Well, science fiction tends to show us the things that we're fearful of, right? And we see that in the science fiction, and we see that in a lot of the writings and things across the internet. Yes, there are roles that are being replaced by automation. But most of the people we're talking to, they are trying to find consistency in the job and what they're trying to do. And so they're going to automation because the humans are not stepping up and doing that. Right now, whenever someone talks about a lot of the ROI and return by automating, they are talking about labor savings. And so you can't ignore that. But if you're running your company well, hopefully you are repurposing and moving those people to open up new markets, to start new products, to do different jobs. And you move those people from doing that more manual task, replace that with automation, and then now you can use them in more creative ways.
And this is sort of a point of fear that we've heard at every technological revolution, right? Every time there's a new form of technology on the market, people say, oh, you're going to have less of this. And, as a result, people are afraid that it's coming for their jobs. But in reality, what we see time and time again is that, this new branch of technology creates many more jobs than it ever, terminates or replaces.
Right. And the jobs are just different, right? The jobs change, jobs move, evolve. And so we've seen that from the Industrial Revolution to the Internet Revolution and all these different things. The jobs just move to different roles.
So, Stephen, another one that we hear all the time is that, our process isn't a good fit for automation. It's too unpredictable. It's too custom. The batch sizes are too small. We're a high mix, low volume shop. It's basically impossible to automate. What do you say to folks that come with this talking point?
Historically, that might have been true. When you talk about more hard automation and some of the things that we have to do to weld things in and they don't change and they're not smart, that was the case. Now with AI, we're able to make a lot of decisions on the fly. And so if things are a little bit off or move a millimeter or two, even a few inches here and there, the robots can adapt to that and work through those situations. So what we do is we take a human-centered design approach where we go and understand what the full process is, what is really being done, what are all the decisions that a human is making in real time, and then we see, is there a software addition to that automation that makes it where the robots can handle it and make those decisions. So there are some things that we just are not best to be automated, but we can take the hardware and the software to pull those things together and say, how do we solve this problem that's seemingly difficult for automation, but can actually be done with a cohesive plan?
Yeah, and Stephen, it strikes me that a lot of those advancements and recent technological leaps have been driven by artificial intelligence, and so it's really the brains behind the hardware, right? So even though the kind of hardware and robotic arms that we're using today might look somewhat similar to the arms that we were using 5 or 10 years ago, what's under the hood is really an entirely different animal.
Exactly. We have graphics cards that are processing imagery and understanding what the environment is so that they're able to react and adapt much faster and differently than historically, where it was just move from point XYZ to point XYZ. If the object was there or not, the robot arm would do that. Now it's wait for to see the object wherever that object appears, see it, and then move it into the next empty location, right? That's a completely different thought process and programming application for a robot. And so it makes it much more versatile and the error rates go down.
Stephen, another myth that we hear all the time is that automation is only for the big companies out there, and that it's just so expensive that it's not accessible for your average entrepreneur or small business person. What do you say to folks that kind of come with that perspective?
Yeah. Again, that's kind of a historical viewpoint, and I think now the robotic arms have become so much less expensive. We're looking at arms that are less than $10,000 now. You take that and you put that with customizable software that you can control, and you're not having to hire a roboticist or an automation engineer to work with you. You can do it yourself through very easy to use software. That's changed the game for a lot of small businesses. And then the other thing is that it's not always a big, huge capital expense. We can do this as robotics as a service. And so you'll see a lot of companies who are saying, yeah, I'm going to pay a monthly fee to make sure it works. And your team manages that and supports it. And that makes it easier and less expensive for them. And so now the small and mid-sized businesses are able to use it. And it's not just the big automotive players, for example.
And in some cases, the stakes are actually higher for the small business as the landscape gets increasingly competitive and error rates increasingly difficult to deal with. A $10 million mistake for a massive company is one thing, but a $10 million mistake for a small business is an entirely different story.
Absolutely. And when we can put quality control and computer vision right at the moment where it happens, we save them money, because if we don't find the quality control problem at the end of the line, then we've missed a lot of opportunity and spent a lot of money we didn't have to. But if we can put quality control throughout the system and have the robotics make a lot less errors than humans typically do, then that way we're saving that small and medium-sized business money. And so they're able to compete at good prices against the larger companies.
So, that brings up an interesting question, Stephen, because I think another myth that we hear frequently is that by embracing automation, business people are going to lose control of their process or lose some sense of visibility over the day in, day out operation of their business.
Yeah. I think the business decision maker actually has more insight into the process. We can give audible trails now with a lot of AI, and you can see things, right? You can have insights into your line at every single aspect of it. So in some ways, you have a little bit more control because you have so much data coming in, and we can let the AI help give you some suggestions and thoughts around how you can make it more efficient, and then that decision maker can choose to engage in those. And so I think in some ways, automation could actually give you more control than you might have otherwise. But to specifically around a human process, those historical processes take months to redo and refine. But if you see a change in your market, that business person with smart automation can actually change that in the same day and make product changes in a matter of hours rather than weeks and months to change a product line.
And, I want to really hone in on the auditable data logs that you brought up, because in some ways, this is kind of a dream, right? Like, imagine if you had all of your frontline workers constantly writing down every single thing that they did at every point in the day. And then you were able to go back and view that record. Now, if they were physically writing this out, they wouldn't get much else done, right? But that's part of the beauty of the automated, kind of equipment there, is that it's able to perform those tasks while also keeping detailed records of everything that happens in that environment. So, Stephen, that brings up another interesting point when we talk about, how do we integrate and deploy these systems that are going to really drive that business value and give you those analytical insights there. A lot of folks are looking at this and sometimes saying, oh, this is too disruptive, or, oh, we don't have the internal skill set to work with these systems long term. What do you say to folks that say we can't automate just because, well, we don't know how to work with robots, we don't know how to program robots?
Yeah. So there's a lot to that, right? And a lot of the fear there is what we don't understand. Now, when we work in supply chain, a manufacturer doesn't necessarily know what it takes to ship that product from their factory to that end client, but they trust, a shipper like UPS or FedEx to do that. Okay. All they know from UPS is I need to get a label, I need to get my object here in this box to this person, and I know that my customer is going to receive it on that time. They don't have to understand the entire logistics chain that UPS and FedEx are going through to do that, right? In the same way with the robotics, if you know this is what I want, this is my inputs, and here's my output of what I want, as long as you have a company that's working along with you and solving all those internal problems and making sure that everything works smoothly, you don't have to know every step along the process, just enough to have a nice overview to understand how it works. And then that's where your great vendors are going to help you to solve those problems. And you don't necessarily have to have a roboticist or an automation engineer on staff.
And it strikes me that we use the term vendor a lot in these contexts, right? Like at all the trade shows and on everybody's website. But the process that you're describing is much more of a partnership, right? It's not
Yeah.
a one and done transaction, but a
Yeah.
long term engagement.
Yeah, I think historically people use that term vendor, like a robotics, solutions provider or whatever. Ultimately, the way things are working is you need someone that you can go to on a regular basis. They are engaged with your team. They're going to evolve with you as your lines evolve, as your products evolve. So does the way you solve those problems. And so, yeah, you want a partner who's willing to go along that journey with you to help to be an expert on the things that you're not an expert on, but they listen to you and understand it. And I think that's really what you're looking for in a partner.
And that long term relationship can create some anxiety for folks, right? Because another myth that we hear all the time is that, by automating, you're locked in with that one specific integrator, that one specific partner that you kind of, did your first pilot with. And, they're kind of worried. Hey, what do I, do long term if I want to transition away from this relationship?
Sure. I think a good partner is going to develop software and systems that are using industry standards. And so therefore you should be able to move and use those in different ways. For example, we develop all in Python. Python is a known and acceptable language, and that is easy for someone to take and do their own thing with at a later date if they want to. And so I think it's one of those that you got to find the right vendor who's not, walling off everything, but you set that as a design requirement. Is like we have to be able to get in and make changes and be able to move to a different place in the future if we want to.
And, I think corollary to that, one of the things that folks seem to be worried about is that, all of this is just too new, too untested, too risky. We don't know how this is going to play out. And there's sort of a wait and see approach out there. What do you say to folks that say, first of all, this is an untested piece of technology and I'm worried about jumping in with both feet?
Well, I think we've had years to see that this is not just an untested piece of technology. This is happening now. It's getting better and we're learning and adding new things and new features. And so there's going to be little bugs and things we have to work through over time. But ultimately, as a concept of, kind of smart automation, this has been around for several years. The big players have been able to do it. Now it's coming down to where the small and medium-sized businesses can do it. And ultimately, there's a high level of expectation that you're going to need to do this. Like it becomes kind of table stakes for your business to be able to compete at this level. So I would argue that you can't keep waiting. We've already had the first movers. We have the second movers who are already there. And so most companies are going to have to jump into this fairly quickly, and they're going to need a partner to help them do that.
And the other side of that, as we've seen the, kind of pace of innovation accelerate so fast, some folks are saying, well, if I, kind of embrace automation today, in a year, that solution is going to be obsolete. Something newer, better is coming. What do you say to folks that have that concern?
I think if you're building things properly, you're able to scale and evolve and change because we can do software updates. As the AI gets better, as the vision gets better, we switch out a camera, we add a new sensor, and we deploy new software. We don't have to change all the hardware all at once. So we want to build on software that uses industry standards, that's safe and easy to use, but that we can deploy software updates to help evolve and change and take that the lifespan of that device and of that arm, for example, and expand it over time.
So, Stephen, that brings me to another thing that I hear from a lot of folks, that this movement towards automation is a fad, and it's not really here to stay.
I think it's really a trend. And the reason we know it's a trend is because we are seeing significant investment in it. We are seeing value by the companies who have already adopted it, who are seeing great value, and they're continuing to move and move and move to do more automation. And so as this grows, it's no longer a fad. It's ultimately something that's becoming an expectation. And I think companies that are not able to move quickly into this space are going to find that their margins are going to suffer. They're not going to be able to meet the same price level that a lot of other companies are, and they're going to have to be able to deal with labor shortages and kind of all of these other factors that come into their business. Automation can solve a lot of these problems and keep them competitive.
Yeah, it seems that it really is becoming table stakes across the board, not a competitive advantage, but something you have to do to kind of keep up.
Yeah, most companies now, if you're going to be doing things that are repetitive, you've got to find a way to do that cost effectively. And this is the fastest way to do that, and one that's going to make you the most competitive.
Well, Stephen, certainly interesting to break down some of these common automation myths. Thank you all so much for joining us. We'll be back next week with more automation insights from Beyond the Bot.